All right, we're back. We are Game 2015 in the winter 2019 semester at George Brown, and we're week 11, part 1 of our broadcast. We're going to do more organic modeling today. I've opened up a discussion board up on Blackboard where there's some stuff that people have done. I think one person uploaded it from today. The discussion board is going to be used for your participation again. Part of your exercise. Exercise 5 is up. It's called Rigging Up Our Monster, which is what we're going to do. We have to make our monster, and then we're going to rig them with Mix 'em Up. So one thing I'm going to ask you to do, again, starting off, is we're going to use a tool called 3D Coat, right? Which is really cool. It does great sculpting. You know, for us, we're going to see that in Blender, sculpting can be done, but it's not great. 3D Coat and other tools like ZBrush, so here's ZBrush, are much better tools for sculpting, you know, organic-looking models than this one, right? So we have, you know, you can see that ZBrush has worked with other shows. This is Westworld as an example, but another tool like ZBrush, it does ZBrush, but other stuff too, is something called 3D Coat. 3D Coat is kind of a mix of different tools. One of them is another tool called Substance. And if you look at Substance Painter and Substance Designer, there's two different parts of the tool, Substance Painter, Substance Designer. What you can use this for is to make PBR textures and shaders. And there's two parts to it. It actually does, all of these textures are programmatically or procedurally created. So they're not something that you take from an image and make a texture. You actually make them programmatically by combining noise and a bunch of different things to create your textures. So Substance is an awesome tool if you are a 3D artist and you're looking to, you know, kind of give different textures and shapes. Substance is awesome. So that's Substance, and it used to be, it says by Adobe, which means it's been bought. That's pretty awesome that Adobe bought that. That means it's going to become more available to all of us, probably through your Adobe CC subscription eventually. Okay, that's pretty cool. But you can see that Substance creates some really awesome textures and everything else, and it's been used in the industry today. Okay, so Substance and ZBrush, I would say, are the two kind of more professional tools that are out there. But we're going to be using something called 3D Coat, because 3D Coat allows us to do something very similar to both Substance and ZBrush, and another tool called TopoGun. So there's another tool called TopoGun, which is also something we use for retopologizing, TopoGun. And what TopoGun does is it takes a very high poly model and creates a low poly version of it that we can use in video games, right? So TopoGun. But so it's kind of like TopoGun, Substance, and ZBrush all rolled into one. Again, doesn't have some of the fidelity that the other ones has, but this is pretty good for what you get. If you download the free 30-day trial while we're talking about Blender, that would be really cool. And again, this is cool. You can also, like we talked about last week, you can buy it through Steam. I think buying it through Steam is actually cheaper than buying it directly through the website. Now it says amateur is $99, which is pretty cool for Windows or Mac or whatever. So that's pretty cool. And professional, you get all the features that are unlocked. If this is something you normally do, I think it's really worth it for $379. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I think it's a great you know, price range compared to some of the other tools that are out there, like ZBrush. If I was going to buy, if I wanted to get the ZBrush version, right? So if I went to 3D software and I went to ZBrush, as an example, I want to buy this tool, you know, kind of thing, get ZBrush. And if I look at pricing for ZBrush, again, not bad, but you notice that it's a monthly fee. It's a subscription service, $39 a month, where you buy, you know, 3D Coat once. Now again, if you're a 3D modeler, $39 a month is a great deal. I think if you're going to use ZBrush. ZBrush is a different tool to use. It's very powerful, but it's kind of a tool that's been built up over many years. And so the interface is always tricky to learn, right? So if you're going to do something like this. And again, TopoGun has its own price. So if I was to go to download TopoGun, and you can see that TopoGun itself is $100, right? So $100 for that one. Substance, if you're going to do some, textures that are, now this is awesome. It's irreplaceable, really. The stuff that Substance Designer can do for you, not the painter part, but the designer part. Let's just go to Substance Designer. Honestly, it is pretty awesome, right? So let's say, for example, it says I can try Substance for 30 days. We don't have time to look at it, but so an indie license for under 100K, and notice that schools and students have their own price for schools and students, and it's all in euros. So Substance Designer is like $129 to buy. 129 euros, right? That's pretty expensive. And again, if you look at your indie license, you can also pay monthly. So there's a monthly plan, $19.99. So again, this all adds up to way more than 3D Coat would cost, and that's why I recommend starting off, if you're going to start off with something. And again, it doesn't replace these programs. Absolutely not. I think these programs have awesome capabilities compared to one program like 3D Coat. But please, what I recommend for you is please download the trial. That's what I'd like you to do. So download the trial for 3D Coat while we're waiting, because it's going to take time. For some of you, it might take only 3 minutes. Other people might take 30 minutes. So start doing this now. We're also going to be talking about a tool called Sketchfab. I forgot to talk about it with everybody else. I don't know if I've talked about this with you guys before, but Sketchfab is an online tool that allows you to sign in. And what you can do is you can upload some of your designs, where you can share them with your, let's see, some of the models I recently put up. So I had some models that I was doing before. I had Arista, she was a model that I was working with before, and I kind of put her up. I made her in 3D Coat, right, but from scratch. And one things you can do with them is you can make your model, and then this has been this is a retopo version of Arista that I kind of made, right? So this is something that you guys can do. I notice she has armor and a bunch of other stuff. So you can share your model up online by using Sketchfab, and we're going to talk about how to do that. So again, your discussion board, I want you to either do a screenshot of today's work. You can do screenshots. You can put up your blend file. You can put up your 3D Coat image if you want. You can even put a link to Sketchfab if you so wish. But I want you to put up this monster you're going to create today with me, whether it's animated or not, in your discussion board, okay, for your participation marks. Okay, let's get back to this. So I'm going to start off with Blender. We know Blender. We've been using it for the semester, pretty much. So here's my Blender, and if I wanted to do some basic organic modeling with Blender, and again, this is just one way of doing it, and by no means is it the only way. If I press Tab, if I go into Edit mode with Blender, please join me in Blender. I go into Blender and go into Edit mode, and I might want to subdivide this object at least, let's say, I don't know, 9 times. 9 seems to be a magic number. There we go. So there's 9 subdivisions. Not a lot of topology right now. Pretty low poly. You might say this is a lot, but actually for organic modeling, this is very little. If you go beyond this, so let's say, for example, if I go to 11 subdivisions, so I go to 10, and I press kind of Enter, and or click away. So let's say kind of click one of those, and then re-highlight everything again. And then I start subdividing again. I subdivide a second time, right? So now one of the things you need to know is that you need to have kind of a division in the middle, because we're going to kind of do a mirror modifier. I believe that doing an odd number of cuts is the way to go. So if you notice there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. That's pretty good because then it's 11 and 11 on both sides. If I did the second one, though, you're going to have an even number. That's bad. But an odd number, it always works out. So there's like right there, there's enough, a bunch of geometry. I'm just going to back out there because I think it's too much for me. Probably going to back out to this one, which is, I first did 10 cuts, and then I came back in and did another one. Right? So there's another cut. I'm going to go into, so it's a little bit more than I did in the first class, and I'll show you why. So if I go back into front, I'm going to look at the front view by pressing the 1 key on the numeric keypad, and I'm going to go into orthographic mode by going into the 5 key. So if I press the 5 key on the numeric keypad, I can go into ortho mode, and you can see now that it's looking pretty flat. I'm going to deselect all by pressing the A key, and I can see that I have the geometry that's been kind of partitioned out here. I'm going to press the Z key to kind of see everything in wireframe mode. And I want to highlight half of the geometry, but not the middle. So I'm going to kind of use the B button to box select. That's what B stands for. Box select half of the model, right, like this. And I want to delete the left half. So if I press X and then press vertices, I can delete the left half. So I have something like this. Are you with me? If you're not, it's going to get hairier after this. So yes, we can certainly do a vertex by vertex model and try and modify the model that we have here to make it more organic looking. And this is some ways we can do this. I can use box select now on some vertices on the left, and then use the G key to kind of smooth this part out. And maybe I can select more of these vertices, kind of thing. Here's the vertices I want to select, and maybe I can move those by using the G key, kind of make it so that there's a bit of different shape. I can start one at a time, but it looks pretty rough, right? I mean, it's like not smooth at all. So I can certainly do this part by just choosing part of the model, one bit at a time. Let me undo that change. I could. So I guess I'm in orthographic mode in the front. So 1 for the numeric keypad and 5 orthographic mode. I've deleted half of my model. One thing I definitely want to do is I want to create a mirror so I can see the other half over here. So I'm going to go into my wrench over here and go to the add modifier. Under the generate column, I'm going to choose the mirror modifier. And it's hard to see here, but you can see that it actually is done this shape in the middle. One thing I'd probably want to do here is, because you guys have a weird, sorry, I'm going to bring this a little closer, smaller, because otherwise you can't see all of my blender. And that's always a bad thing in this room. All right. Again, kind of like this, right? So I've kind of got this shape. And if I press the Z key again, you can see that I have half the model that's something I can modify, and the other half is just a mirror of the right half. And I notice I've made the mirror modifier by going to the little wrench, adding a modifier, mirror modifier, which is this one, and then adding in the mirror modifier on the x-axis. I also want to click on clipping, which is the middle. Remember I talked about this? This way I can't move the middle vertices, the ones that are clipped to the other side. Otherwise, if I turn this off, I can, and I can create holes in my model, which is not good. I don't want holes in my model like this. This is a bad thing, right? And that's kind of weird that it did this, that it kind of subdivided everything and I have an underlying surface. That's kind of weird. I didn't expect that. So yeah, you can see what I've done. So I've got clipping on. Now, I could also use kind of an organic modeling with Blender by, on the bottom here, there's something called proportional editing. So in the middle, on the bottom, there's this little button, and you can turn proportional editing on, where it says enable. You can also enable it with the O key, right? So proportional editing, what it does is, if I grab a vertex, let's say this one, and if I press G for modeling, you can see that I have this big sphere of influence. And I can reduce the sphere of influence. I can kind of go down here and make it smaller by scrolling in with the scroll wheel, right? Or I can make it bigger by doing one of these. So I can kind of create the shape that I want ahead of time. right, with this. So I kind of create my shape, and again, press the G key to kind of zoom in there. You can see that I've kind of created my shape. Again, I can press the G key to kind of make the shape that I want if I really want it to go there, and I can increase or decrease my influence, you know, as an example, as I go. And this can take a long time and maybe not produce the results that I want because, you know, I mean, I've still got kind of an organic shape to it. I could also choose less influence. I mean, I've got a big sphere, right? So I could choose less influence here or more. Let's make it less influence. I can kind of more control over how this looks, right? So there we go. And, you know, whatever. It looks pretty good, but it's very rigid. And you see this line here, and maybe that's not what I want, right? So a lot of work to be done. Yes, could I do it? I could. I could modify each of these verts and then slowly create the shape that I want by pulling. Sometimes we do that, you know, kind of pulling the verts together. You can see that I'm creating a, you know, kind of a shape to my mesh that looks kind of like this. I can kind of modify it or deform it the way that I want. I'm just going to do all those changes. Get me back to that place where I had mirror modified and just made this shape like this. So this is okay, but maybe a better way to do this would be to go into something called Sculpt Mode, right? So Blender has kind of an edit mode that you can edit things vertex by vertex or face by face or edge by edge. That's great for again for hard surface modeling, but for organic modeling, sometimes it's better to go into Sculpt Mode. So Sculpt Mode is here. Sculpt Mode, the problem with it is you don't really see what you're getting. So sometimes what I want to do with Sculpt Mode is I want to start off, if I go to the Cube tab and I click on Wire, I can see the wires in my object in Sculpt Mode, right? And right now I see that there's two parts. There's a left half and the right half. On the left is the type of brush you're going to use, right? So here's the brush. And then there's a radius for the brush, which is this property, and also a strength for the brush, which is how much influence you're going to have with your deformations. So again, if I go to here, I can start, you know, actually drawing with the brush, right? I'm just like left clicking here to do this, right? So I can kind of build this up a little bit here, and you can see that I can start creating almost like a face with Blender very, very slowly. And I can keep on adding more or modifying the geometry a little bit at a time. I can also increase the strength of this. I can make it 100%. It'll be more dramatic as I do this, right, for this part here, this adding. And I can increase the radius, my influence. So how much of my influence is going to work, I can kind of modify this again more. You can see that I can completely add more what looks like geometry. I'm not really doing that. I'm just modifying the vertices and pulling them out to make it look like this, okay? I can choose different brushes. I can use clay. The clay brush is very similar to what we already did. My size is too big. I probably want to reduce that a little bit so it's have more control. But again, what this does is it allows me to smooth some of this on the left-hand side. It's hard to see, but you can see that I can do that here. Kind of clay strips here, where I can kind of create almost like what looks like a texture on the object. So that's not bad, and especially around the corners here, I can create that look and feel, still kind of squarish. And then maybe add a crease. So creasing, what it does is it adds a little bit more detail to the model. And again, we're looking at a very low poly model right now compared to what I would normally work with. And I could increase the poly count. So this is one way of doing it. I mean, I'm still low, fairly low poly count here. And you might say, well, but there's tons, right? And there is. But if I go back to edit mode, you can see that there's not a lot. I've done some, but it really is dependent on the amount of geometry, how much control I can have, right? So if I was to subdivide this further, so I can kind of select all and then subdivide it more. So let's say, for example, I want to subdivide this a bunch more times, so it looks something like this. Let's say, I don't know, 4 more times. So it looks like something like this. This is more realistic in terms of the amount of geometry that I need to have in order for me to have a smoother thing. So again, I've subdivided 4 more times is what I've done here. And if I go back now into the sculpt mode, you can see now that I have much more influence. It looks more rounded, a lot smoother when it comes to some of the stuff that I can do here. There we go. And again, if I was to go back to the, not to blob, but to actual, the sculpt draw, you can see now that I have way more influence than I had before. I can create those like creases, almost like eyes. You know, I can add kind of a nose area and then maybe add a sculptural look to it. There's a sculptural look to it. And again, some ridges for the skull and those kind of things. So I can start making it look like, blocking out what things should look like. It's going to kind of create the maybe a bit of a jaw, where I want the jaw to be. And then the skull. And if I want to get this gone, this part right here, maybe make it more rounded, I can kind of just round this off for a second. And so it looks like a mess. And then what I can do is I can use the grab tool, which is another tool that's in here, and I can increase my size of my brush to grab this area and kind of move it in. What grab does, it actually takes all the geometry and moves it. It doesn't really expand anything physically. It doesn't add to the geometry. It just literally moves it around, which you'll see. You can do the same thing in 3D Coat later on. But you'll also see that it's much more effective. So again, I'm just blocking out the general shape of my object right now, just to give myself some shape. And you can see that it's turning out to be a disaster. But you can fix this. One of the things that I've found out from some of my friends and colleagues that also do this kind of work is that the notion that it's never good until it is, right? It's not good enough until it is. And so now I'm going to smooth things out. I'm just using the smooth brush here. Be careful with smoothing. Smoothing, you'll see that it destroys a lot of your details, right? So it destroys details. And you can see that we can be playing with this all day long. And let's make that strength, move the strength up a little more so we have more influence all at once. And we can see that slowly we're influencing the shape of this to be a little bit more rounded. Let's reduce that in there. So Blender has these sculpting tools to do this. Now I started off with a cube. I definitely could have started off with a different shape instead of a cube. I'm just going to go back to the grab tool now. I could have started off with a sphere, which might have been maybe better. In some ways, spheres are great to start with because they already have a general shape and you can modify that general shape, as opposed to try and make a cube into a sphere. Much more difficult unless you do. There's other tools, of course, that can help us out, but we can kind of make this, block a little bit more spherical by, again, just pulling this in with the move tool. That's all I'm doing here, slowly. And then we can smooth it out with the smooth tool. So go here and smooth this out. There's also other tools you can use for like flatten. Flatten, actually, you gotta be really careful because what it does is it really takes away all your detail. It's like another kind of smooth in Blender. That's what it does. Again, I'm just kind of I'm making this rounder here. So again, starting off with a cube and then moving into something that looks more spherical. All right, so again, we're going to get that shape that we want. And then we can do things like go to the grab tool and pull the chin out, maybe the front part of the face, maybe like the nose. And push this in, then do more smoothing. Again, I would go to the smooth tool and smooth that out so it doesn't look so dramatic, and then keep going, right? Until you get to the point where, and again, this is in symmetry, so you get this weird middle part, which is where you're losing the chin part. You can actually fix this by just grabbing and pinching until you get to the right shape that you want. Again, this is an iterative process like I mentioned before. Let's go back and flatten, not inflate, flatten. I get that in there. And then, you know, you're getting closer to what you're looking for, maybe. And again, keep doing this, again, by grabbing and pinching and moving things around until you make that a little bit smaller, the radius, until you get to the shape that you're looking for, which is going to maybe eventually look like a human head. All right, so you can see how that works, okay? And if I go back into tab, I can tab in. You can see that there's lots and lots of geometry, fairly unusable for a game. I can retopologize it after this, make it lower model. I can decimate it, all this kind of stuff in Blender. But as you'll see, my friends, the process that I spent just now is really long compared to what I can do with another tool like ZBrush or with 3D Code. Has everyone downloaded 3D Code? How about Ricardo? Ricardo, you downloaded 3D Code? 3D Code. 3D Code. Oh, yeah. All right, let's kick off 3D Code, and let's just kill this model in Blender, because this is just I want to show you what it looks like to do sculpting in Blender. It's okay. Yes, you can do it. It takes a lot longer. Anything you want to do, you can do it in Blender. It just sometimes it takes longer than other things. I'm going to bring up 3D Code here. Again, this is another tool that I recommend compared to Blender. I'm just going to try and bring this up so we can see the screen while I'm recording. And I have to be honest, I've been recently learning this tool as well. So there's some things that don't know 100% about it, but it's really cool what it can be done. Notice that you have some different options when you bring up 3D Code for the first time. I have TF2. I'm not sure if you guys have, but if I want to make quick TF2 models. But there's something called voxel sculpting that I want you guys to do. So again, what's the difference between a voxel and a pixel? A voxel is a group of pixels, usually in a cubic shape. A good example of voxel game is something like Minecraft, where you use voxels and procedurally generate an entire biome. You know, like say, for example, a desert or a mountain or something like that, with an algorithm to do that for you, right? Which is kind of cool. And you have several biomes to create your world, and it's all procedurally generated with voxels. So again, if you notice here, I've got some different options. Again, I went into voxel sculpt. I went to here, and then I clicked on voxel sculpting. So let's do this together, voxel sculpting. And you can choose from different shapes. If I wanted to start off with a shape like one of these, I could. I want to start off with an actual human shape for now. So let's choose this one, the second one from the right. Okay, navigation in 3D Code is slightly different. Here's where it is different. If I right-click on 3D Code, I can zoom in and out. Okay, right-clicking. If I left-click, I can orbit around 3D Code. So this is where I can orbit. If I both left-click and right-click, I can pan in, and then I can kind of zoom in with my right-click again, so I can kind of zoom into my shape. All right, there we go. So kind of right in there. And you can see now that I have access to my model. One thing to note is, if I do anything to my model right now, it only happens on one side. Here's an example of some stuff I can do. On my left side is the toolbar. And if I click on Grow, which is kind of a very simple tool, notice when I hover over the model, I have a circle, and there's a little, what looks like, if you can see it, it looks like this little curve, right? The curve is actually the strength of the influence that I'm going to apply. And I can change this by right-clicking when I'm on here. So if I kind of go up or down here, you can see that I can increase the strength of my curve, my influence that this will have. If I make it lower, it's going to have lower influence. Make it higher, it's going to have greater influence or greater strength. Let's leave it as high, and so you can see it. And if I want to decrease, I can just scroll wheel out to decrease the size, and then I can kind of add the details that I want into my model, right? Whatever I want. And you can see that it's a much better organic way of doing things. as I increase that. But this is only happening on one side, not the other side. Whenever we work with a model that's organic, a lot of times I want to do mirror, a symmetry mode, and you can turn symmetry on with 3D Coat by pressing the S key. Press S key, it'll come up with a little menu in 3D Coat, and what I can do is I can click on the X-axis, which creates an X-axis symmetry plane that looks like this, that cuts the model in half. You can see that. And when I do that, anything I do on the right happens on the left, right? Let me undo that. Let me undo those things. Again, I'm in the same model, and I want to press S, the S key, when I click on the X-axis symmetry. If you don't want to see the symmetry plane because it bugs you, you can turn it off. You can press the S key, and where it says Show Symmetry Plane, just click on the little checkbox there, or check mark, and then it's gone. All right, so let's make this our model. All right, so what I want to do is I'm going to start off with grow, and I'll show you what that does. So again, if I grow, I can add geometry where it's at, so I can see that I'm actually adding maybe a ridge or some kind of eyebrow or whatever it's going to be there. I can add kind of a nose in there as well by growing, so I can kind of grow that area up. Be careful because sometimes you'll get weird shapes like this because of the symmetry, right? And then what I can do is then I can smooth. Smooth, remember, it kills your geometry. So be very careful when I use smooth. It like literally destroys my geometry. So anything that I've done, yeah, it'll smooth it, but it'll also take away details, and that's not may not be what you want. So again, I'm just kind of smoothing that out, right? And again, I can continue to grow the shape here. So I kind of add more geometry, and then definitely one way of doing it. And then smooth it out, right? So again, just smooth it out. So kind of add the shape, make sure it's so it adheres to the shape that I want as I continue to do this. Now I'm doing this in one layer. On the left, you can see this is all in one layer. It's this. You see that there's on the right-hand side, there's something that's a Vox Tree. I'm not sure if you guys can see this. Let me just put the shaders back to where they were. And the presets back to where the shaders were. And the Vox Tree down here. I can move this around. You can move this stuff around so you don't have to have it where it was before. You mess with the layout a little bit of kind of like what you like. But I just want to move these up a little bit to here. And move that there. I'm just moving the panels around. What I'm doing right now. I'm going to put these there too. And the presets. And they don't like being put together somehow. Let's try that again. Move this down. Great. So now we have our Vox Tree down here, like we had before. But you can see that there's stencils and shaders. We're going to get to this in a second. So what I want to do in the Vox Tree is show you that there are different layers. There's the main layer that I'm working on right now, and there's the root layer, which is where kind of this layer is on. Sometimes I want different things to be on different layers because it's easier for me to sculpt with. Because, you know, for example, I'm modifying the entire thing here. But what might be better is if I had a separate nose all together and stuff like that. So if I want to do this. So you can see now it's starting to come together in terms of my blocking out. It's not really great. So that's what smoothing does. Fill, if there's any holes or ridges, what fill will do is it's a different kind of smooth where it'll fill ridges and holes. Vox clay, it's interesting in that it, again, it's almost like adding a layer of like more clay. Again, I got a heavy influence here. I can bring this right down. But it's almost like it adds geometry fairly quickly. Again, if you don't want to see something like this, you can always reduce it by just undo it by pressing Control Z. Bring it back. Carved, interesting. It adds in almost like scratches. So it kind of scratches areas onto the mesh. It kind of carves in geometry as opposed to, which is really rough, as opposed to the way that Grow does it. And again, you can come back and smooth that all away. If you want to add geometry, that's a pretty quick way of doing it, and smoothing it will take it away. If you smooth too much, you'll smooth right through the object. You can actually make a hole with smooth, right? So be careful with it. And let's go back to blob. So blob, what it does is it kind of does a blob in a square area. So there's a square and it'll add a blob. And there's another square and it'll add another blob. And it's really weird because if you notice, I can add a blob in space too, right? Which is kind of weird. So be careful with blob. May not be what you want, but it adds these little squares. And you can change the size and the shape of your brush, and I'll do that in a second. Airbrush. Airbrush, again, it adds kind of a smoothing geometry to everything, but it kind of brushes on geometry into an area. So let's say, for example, I want to add some shape to my chin and my head there. I can add that shape, making a nice little monster. So we're starting off this way. Go. Maybe add some ridges to his neck. And there we go. So he's kind of a weird looking monster now. Not a lot of detail though. So let's add some other ones. Let's try build. Again, it tells you what it does. Build tool, it says this tool constantly grows the surface beneath the cursor. If you look at each one of them, they do that. Pick a point moves together with distorted surface. So again, if I'm going to make this smaller by scrolling in, and if you notice, it'll build right underneath the surface of my cursor, which is a little different than grow. And again, I can kind of do this until I get the kind of the details that I want here. When I kind of add this eye area. There we go. Kind of like these lines on his face. And build up the nose area. And I don't have the mouth yet, but I will. Right? He doesn't have ears either. Maybe he hears in a different way, this dude. He's an alien. I don't know. Very humanoid looking for the rest of them. But his face is definitely like that Star Trek alien kind of face, right? Where he's got a ridge on his face, right? Some kind of prosthetic. I don't know. All right, so that's cool. That's what build does. Extrude. It actually extrudes from the area. If you hover over this again, it says extrude the surface on the constant value. This tool uses left mouse button to extrude the currently selected brush outward from the surface. So it's to the surface normals. And again, at the top here, you can see the radius and the strength, the steady stroke if you want to use. There's other options on the top here that tells you how it works and if it builds up or not. So if I click on build up, then you can see that it's going to slowly build up that surface by extruding it on top of what I already have. So if I have a surface, it's going to build it up. And if I click off build up, you'll see that it does a different effect. Right? So again, I can extrude this area, make it a little bit deeper, and to create that eye ridge the way I want it, right? There's the nose ridge of my alien. Okay, there we go. And I kind of have his shape of his head, which is kind of cool. Until they kind of connect to the back of his head. Almost like hands. And maybe that's a little bit too symmetrical. And again, we can go back and take symmetry off if I want and give him a little bit more character. Symmetry is great for a start, but then we want to kind of make it so that he looks realistic as well, which usually entails less symmetry and more character. Okay, that's pretty cool. Let's define his chin now, or his jaw. Spheres are cool too. Spheres actually can work anywhere. If I click the sphere button, I can make a sphere anywhere I want in 3D space. Those are great for horns, or if I want to start somewhere, or I can make them really small so I can kind of add stuff that kind of flows outside of the character. That's pretty cool, right? So if I want to make kind of a horn or let's say tentacles. If I want to make this into more of a Cthulhu or a Cthulhu, kind of character, I can kind of do that by doing these. Also, when you're in this mode, turning and stuff is difficult, but you can do it with the tools up here. So you can kind of rotate on the top to see if that's what you want. Right? What plane does is it creates an area, and let me just unclick that, click back on plane. It creates an area that you can cut with. And let's see if I can get that bigger and bigger. And maybe on the x-axis. What this does is it creates a plane on different axes. And if I create that plane and I kind of draw it, once I've got that plane in there, I can use it for cutting away details. And I don't want to do that this big, but if I want to, I could. Like something like, just move away. And is it there yet? No. So these tools here are the same as if you're, so it says Alt, left mouse button. If you want to try Alt and left mouse button, you can actually do this as well, pressing the Alt key. So that it tells you the controls. So this is, it toggles rotation. That's Alt left mouse button. That's Alt middle mouse button. So if middle mouse button will actually move this around. Now if I did this, and now that I have the plane, and I cut this guy in half, I can probably cut him in half with this thing, which I don't want to do. All right, but if I want to, I could. And there's also Alt and right mouse button for zooming in and out. So there you go. So there's a zoom. And you can see that I can try and intersect this guy with this thing, which is not really what's happening. Yes?
How did you turn the plane to be like parallel to the
This. X, Y, right? So if I click on the Y plane or here's the negative X plane, right? So I can start cutting them and take a look what happens now. I can actually cut them in half. And that kind of is not what I want, right? It reduces them. So I'm going to undo that change. But that's what planes do. Okay, scrape. Let's go back to another one. Let's do another tool, scrape. So scrape, it kind of creates a ridge, as an example where geometry already exists. Just undo that. Geometry already exists. I can scrape the skin of the character, kind of produce a different kind of effect. Sometimes it's really hard to see our effects with this shader. We have a shader on that looks like skin, but sometimes it's better to look at them metallically. So if I was to, on the right, guys, you see there's a bunch of shaders. And these shaders are great for testing what it's going to look like. If I wanted to click on metallic, I can see what the metallic shader might look like on this guy. This is not going to be the final product by any means, but it actually tells you it shows you some of the defects in terms of the way this thing will be shaded if it was a metallic looking shader. You can choose other ones like bronze and stuff to kind of give them that different kind of look. And I find this is kind of effective in seeing some of the defects in the work that I'm doing. If I don't like certain things, like I'm not sure if I like those tentacles, they look a little bit too weird. But if I go to scrape and I reduce this, back to scrape again, I reduce this, I can see what scrape will do, which is actually like another kind of smoothing in some ways that actually scrapes in geometry. So if I want his nose, I want his nose to be more pronounced, maybe I want to kind of have it flatter. So it creates a flat surface where I can scrape away kind of his geometry. So that's not bad if it makes sense for you to do that. Again, remember this is an iterative process. So, you're going to get to the shape that you want by just continuously going slowly. One thing I'm not doing, here's another flaw in what I'm doing. I'm not using a reference. So a lot of times if you want them to look like a certain way, you'd have a reference model or image that an artist would draw for you, and you want to try and make it look kind of like that instead of free form like how I'm doing it right now. This is not a great way of doing it. Even the artists true artists use references to kind of create a model that's more realistic or more detailed. All right. pinch. Pinch is kind of what it does is it pinches things together and kind of creates a crease sometimes. It can also reduce some of the geometry in certain areas. Lerp, the blur tool. Yeah, no, the smudge is a different tool altogether. That's down here. But pinch, what it does, it actually pinches geometry. But what it does is for small areas, it can add in more details. Smudge is what you're thinking of. Smudge, what it does, it actually pulls areas together that are already there and creates that smudging effect, right? Where it kind of blends in, you know, stuff from one ridge to the other. This is also good if you want a blending, not a smoothing necessarily. Well, maybe it's a different kind of smoothing, but what it just smudges in from one place to the other, the shape of the object. Now it's kind of destroyed my eye a little bit. Not sure if I like that. But I can always go back and grow it again, right? So I can just go back and grow that area. If I want kind of a deep looking eye, I could do that. I don't have an eyeball. I'm going to try and add that in. And again, maybe I want to grow some of this. So go ridges on the ridges. Make it kind of a little different looking because they look a little bit too much like tubes as opposed to tentacles. So kind of make it so that the ridges connect to the guy's face a little bit more, right? Almost like hair, right? Same thing with this. Again, we have to be careful with the symmetry because sometimes it doesn't look good when you're starting off. Again, this is just really high level starting off. There's a lot more we can do when we get to these things here. Okay, there we go. So here's his shape. Maybe what I want to do is add some horns, and there's some other things we can do with that. So maybe some horns back here. I kind of coalesce more of the area that I want to draw here. And what I can do is, let's say, for example, I want to block out the horns. So I want to kind of put it right here. I can build this area up, right? Build this area up so it's kind of like thrown out. Again, I'm just using this brush. Now, one thing I didn't talk about is brushes. On the right, you can see that there's different options for alphas. Guys, take a look. Different alphas. Right now I'm using kind of like this smooth fall off. I can use more of a harsh brush if I want, which does a much harsher fall off. I can also increase the size of that. So if I want to grow this really quickly, I can do that fairly powerfully if I want to. It may not look right until I have what I want, but I can kind of definitely grow it up until it looks pretty freaking scary. All right, that's with this kind of brush. You can also choose other kind of brushes. If you want to add some weird ridges on the guy's body, you can do that as well, right? So kind of maybe some scaly parts to him or whatever. You can kind of, or more ridges. You can do that. So almost like his whole upper half is with all these tentacle-looking things that make up his body, right? And there's other options as well to add noise to your stuff. It kind of adds almost like a rough skin, rough noise. See how that does that? It's actually it's a procedural kind of, brush that adds different ridges and can increase the size of, let's say, his rib cage. Didn't really have a chance to do this with the other team. All right, so he looks somewhat human, but there's going to be parts of him that are, built up a little differently than a human. Maybe I don't like that part there that I just did. Maybe here it's fine. Right, so kind of like this. If you ever want to go back to looking at him, what it looks like with the skin, skin looks like this now. So skin. You can also change different colors. A lot of times this helps. The colors really help us define where his issues are. Let's keep going. All right, one of my favorite tools is the move tool, right? So if I look at the move tool, which is way down here under adjust, what you can do with the move tool is exactly what we did with Blender. So I kind of take this and I can actually move it out. If I want to make so that the horns are more pronounced at the beginning, I can do that. I can kind of shape or block out what this thing is going to look like. And then I can go back and smooth it out. So there, I kind of create those horns, right, into the shape that I want. I can just pull that shape out, right? There we go. Really weird looking devil, right? And I can do that if I wanted to pull some of his, let's say I wanted to pull his whole face so it looks like it's longer. I can do that. I can kind of stretch it out, right? So his face kind of looks longer in there, and same thing with the back of his head. Maybe his head kind of looks like it's like more elongated now, as opposed to like a regular human head, right? I can also do that with his muscles. If I want him to have bigger muscles or a different kind of shape to his bones, I can extrude or move those things around. Be careful how you use the tool though, because it can make it so that it's kind of weird looking. He's got kind of like mitts right now, which is fine with me. I'm not going to kind of add those in. Same thing with his muscles here. If I want to make his muscles strange or different, let's say for example, maybe he's got a different shape into his hips. I can do that, or to his buttocks there. Let's say that. Right. Okay. That's what move does. Eventually, though, I may want to go all the way down. I may want to smooth everything. So if you look at the bottom where it says smooth all, if I do this, be careful. What it does is it actually produces a smooth algorithm on the entire body. Remember, smoothing destroys detail. So if I do that a couple more times, you can see that it's slowly doing that. That's one thing. If I click on the Res Plus, be careful. If you ever click there, I'm not doing it right now, but it actually increases the poly count, and I don't want that. If I don't like some feature, like for example, I really don't like his horns. I don't think they go with this whole character. I can cut them off. And the way to do that is if I scroll back up to where it says cut off, literally I can cut anything that's inside of an area. So let's see if I can move them around. Again, I'm using the Alt key when I'm in this mode to move them around. So I can cut off an area by literally drawing the area I want to cut off. So let's say I want to cut off his horns exactly like this. I can kind of cut off, I can create a box, and I can cut off those horns roughly. And so they look like this. So that's kind of I can cut off those horns. And then I can just smooth them out, right? So I can kind of move up to the top here. Let's say I want something like that, but I want to, I didn't want exactly what those horns look like. So I can kind of go there and smooth them out. You know, so kind of he has a ridge that kind of looks like a proto horn or something like that, or horns. But, you know, now I've smoothed them off, so it's more like a, you know, something else on the top of his head. There we go. It's pretty scary looking. Maybe this needs to be pulled back a little bit. So again, I'm going to go back to the move tool and zoom into where I want to move it, and just kind of maybe move it back to the place where I want it until I get the right shape. Right? But then I can always smooth it back. Like, it looks pretty rough right now, but I'm going to smooth it in until I have the shape that I want. So again, going back to smooth, or fill. Fill might be also a nice touch, because it fills in all the holes and doesn't really kill the details. So a little bit different than smoothing. And I can, again, if you want to increase the strength, you can right click and see this little curve. You can increase the curve, which increases the strength of how much you fill at the time. So this just kind of makes it quicker, but again, be careful with this, because it can also kill details. There we go. So kind of these ridges on the top of his head, and we can kind of fill in some of that detail in here. Kind of smooth some of it out. Until we have the shape that we want. Maybe, I don't know, maybe this is the shape. There we go. Maybe especially back here where I want to kind of smooth in some of this area, I'm just filling right with that. And then I can add more detail again. I can go back and build on the detail that I already have by going back and carving or growing or whatever. I'm going to stop in a second because I want to move on to something else. I'm going to change that brush back to this. Notice that each time you change a brush, it only is specifically to that particular tool. So again, if I want to add some kind of growing, I can do that. And if I don't like that, I can just undo. Let's say kind of maybe another kind of brain or some kind of other, area ridge that builds up. Maybe that's too much. I definitely saw that off with the smooth tool, right? Smooth tool can also, like I said, it actually can add holes in your shape. So be careful when you smooth it off. Like maybe I don't even like that whole ridge that I created, so I'm going to go back and take it away. That looks a little better, almost like some kind of buildup of a brain matter. Maybe if I want to add more details, maybe what I'll do is I'll carve it in. So I'll kind of go into the carving area and carve that fill in. And then smooth that out or fill it in. And we'll just reduce the strength of the fill way down. We can fill some of that in, smooth it off a little bit more with like so. Okay, so that's pretty good. I think I'm going to stop here because just time. I can play more later. But I want to add another layer because I want to add an eyeball. And there's a couple ways to do this. Remember, we're in symmetry mode, so whatever we add in, we have to be careful because it might appear in the wrong place. Moving it around might be challenging. So I want to, in here on the root, I can create another layer. So I can go down here and I can add another layer, right? There it is. Now this one looks like this is the body. So if I go body, and then I can add a layer in here, double click, and add this as the eye. So eyes. And I want to add, in my eye layer, I want to add in a primitive. You can do that. If you scroll all the way down, you can see that there's something called primitives. And when you click on primitives, you have a group of primitives you can use. For example, I can add in, if I scroll in there, I can add in a sphere. So here's a sphere primitive, right? Where I can draw the primitive that I want. And let's make sure that I can see it. Let me just undo this thing. So can I see my primitive? Go back to the eye. And we'll ghost this. I'll talk about ghosting in a second. But basically what I want to do is I want to go back and add in a primitive. And where is that? Oh, there it is. Haha. It was already there. There you go. So undo. Yeah, so the primitive was already there, just in the wrong place. What you can do is you can bring it in. It's pretty big. We can modify this. The eye is massive, right? It's also symmetrical because of the symmetry plane that I've got going on. I want to kind of bring it into place. And then what you can do is under this, you can see as you go down, you can also do, I want to transform this option, this object. So again, underneath primitives, there's options to transform. This is add. You can subtract, intersect, split. You can do all kinds of stuff with primitives. But what I really want to do is, I'm going to go back to the right place, adjust, transform. And I add that a primitive in that. No, you can't do it unless it's added. Let me just make sure. Go back to primitives. Yeah. I need to apply it. So here's my application. I got to apply the primitive. And then once I have the primitive applied, right, then you can see that I have those objects, right? Here's my primitive. It's in the middle of his head, right? What I want to do is I don't want to make it in his head. I want to move it over a little bit so I can have two of them, like two eyes, right? And I'm going to ghost the rest. So there's controls here. You can hide his body, or you can ghost his body, and that so that makes it so that you can't touch his body, right? And so what I want to do here is I want to make these smaller, but first I need to actually, you can actually do this here too. You can change the things like radius. I can change the radius of the object right now, right in here before I make it, which is all I want to do. Oops. And then I can bring it into place. So notice it's not in the right position. I'm going to put his eye in the right place, just a sphere right now. And you can see how it's going to wrap around his, or it's going to be hidden inside of his body. For the most part, just that one part is going to appear in there, right? So kind of bring it out a little bit more. And like this. And then I'm going to click apply. And that's going to actually put that in there. And so it's inside of his body, but you can't see it. And then what I can do is I can turn on a different color. So you can make it so that it is looking like this. Here's his eyes. And when I do this, if I go and I unghost it, you can see that he's got two objects. He's got an eye object here and sphere. The eye is low poly, as you can see. And now this is a great place that I would increase the resolution, right? So I can go down to where it says Res Plus. I'm only clicking on the eye layer, and I can increase the resolution of that, I would say, a couple of times to make it smoother looking for what I want. This is what the creature is going to look like right now. Okay? Yes?
Where did you create this sphere?
The which one?
Where did you create this sphere for the eyes?
So I went and did, that's good. So I went to primitives,
oh.
right? And then under there, you have to apply it in order for it to be in. So when I go primitives, if I want to add in a sphere, so here's a sphere. If I want this sphere to come in, I need to click apply, and then it can actually be in the scene. Otherwise, it won't be in the scene. So I'll undo that.
And then you're doing here with like symmetry of the axis.
Axis, yeah. So I have it on both sides, right? So it's like the eyes are on both sides of the body. I can do the same thing for, I can flatten the sphere. I can make this so that it's more flat to add an ear or a nose or whatever. And a lot of times I like to do each of the body parts separate so I have more control. Okay, so that is the actual body itself. It looks pretty ugly or scary, it could be. If I go back to body, I can choose that it's more of a bronze type. There's my bronze looking body again, almost like a statue. And if I click on eyes, right, here's the eyes. I can choose a different kind of eye, right? So maybe I want to make it metallic looking. I can do that too. So a different kind of metallic looking eye, which can also look pretty scary. But the idea is this is maybe what I want my guy to look like eventually, right? This is just an idea of getting almost a preview of what my model is going to look like. All right, cool. But this, my friends, if I bring this into Blender, we're in deep trouble. And I want to show you this because remember, these are voxels. They're not surface shapes. And by the way, I can go into surface mode a different way, but I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to go into File, Export. And if I export my scene, export scene, I can export it as, I'll just call this my, we'll call this a Chthon. So here's my Chthon. It's kind of an alien, kind of part of the Cthulhu Brotherhood. I don't know, making this up. So here's my Chthon, and he's going to be an FBX model. So I'm going to save him as an FBX. One thing also I recommend highly, by the way, when you save him as an FBX, you can tell him the reduction percentage. So here's 50% reduction, and press OK, and let it do its work in the background. One thing to do so that we don't get frustrated, because I get frustrated sometimes when this happens, is I want to save my model. So save my model as a Chthon .3b, which is the type of model that is supported by 3D Coat. So Chthon. Because, my friends, it can crash. All right, it depends. It's really system dependent here when you use 3D Coat to make your stuff, right? And sometimes what'll happen is you'll just crash out, and that's not cool. So let's bring that model I just made into Blender. So I'll kick off Blender again. There it is. And I'm just going to File, Import as FBX. And I'm going to choose on my desktop that model of Chthon. And what do I get when I bring him in? And how crazy is it? Notice it's taking a long time because this is 19 megabytes. The model itself is 19 megabytes. right? And if I was to zoom in on that thing, here's my model. It looks almost perfect, right? Look, in Blender, I bring him in. Now, try and do this by yourself in Blender, like make a model like this in Blender. That might be really hard to do, right? But we're going to have some issues, because if I was to tab into edit mode, this is what we got. So tell me, how am I going to do anything in edit mode? Help me out here. How do I even unwrap this guy, right? This is a way too many polygons for a game. It's not game ready. It's great for a scene if I want to make a, some kind of cinematic or something like that. Even cinematics would be crazy to render. It's way too much. And also, if I look inside these things, I mean, I have triangulation happening. These are triangles. This is way bad for making this model work. It's not proper, all right? And it's too much detail for what we need, okay? Because games don't need this kind of detail. So we need to somehow decimate him or reduce him in poly count. And the best way to do that is to retopologize him. Retopologize him. So there are some really great tools to do that. I'm just going to do this import in Blender. Actually, let's just make a new scene. There we go. And go back to 3D Coat for a second. Here's 3D Coat. I want to retopologize him. Retopologizing basically takes a high resolution model, high poly count, and it reduces to low poly count. And the way to do this is to go into the body. You notice each layer can be retopologized. So I want to retopo the body. So I click on the body layer. It quickly flashes. And I want to right click, and I want to do something called auto topo. So auto topo, there's some modes, different modes to use. You can use something called old style quadrangulation, which just does quads. And if you did this, some options. I'm going to show you a couple of options here for retopoing. If you hover over what this thing is, it does smoothing steps, and the more smoothing steps, the less detail. So I want to bring this down by just clicking next to it and moving down. And this one says millions of triangles at the intermediate stage, decrease its value to speed up the process, increase to capture fine details. I want to increase this dramatically, maybe to something like 0.6 in that range, and then press OK. Even with that, though, what ends up happening is you get loss, data loss. I've got something like 604,000 polygons. That's what happens, and I get something that looks like this. So this is pretty good. The one good thing about this with old style quadrangulation is it actually has converted everything to quads, right? And remember I talked about this before. Quads are always good because it allows us to deform a character more efficiently. If this was triangles, that would be very bad. Now I can actually export this into Blender, but you're going to see that there's a problem with this one too. So I'm going to say File. I'm going to export the retopo objects right here. I'm going to export this into again an FBX. So let's go back to FBX. Let's choose the same one, Python FBX, and press Save. And it'll save on top of it. And then I can bring that one into Blender instead. So File, again, import FBX, and then choose on my desktop the Python.fbx, which is now only 394K. But as you're going to see, sometimes it becomes a little rough. You got to kind of balance between saving. Sorry, just want to make sure that this is correct here. Saving polygon count with what this thing gives you. And notice that there's also some weird stuff that it didn't do for us. If I go into edit mode, it doesn't look terrible in edit mode. Here it is in edit mode, right? It doesn't look terrible. However, the face has lost quite a bit of detail. And also I got this really weird hole happening here. I'm not sure if that was part of my model, if I messed it up somehow. But that is not exactly what I'm looking for, right? And again, going back out to this, and if I go to flats, you can see what it really is. This is what the real model looks like. And this is what will go up in Unity. This is what actually the model will mostly look like. A little bit too rough for my liking, that's for sure. If I go to flat to smooth, it's better. Looks a little better, but it's still quite rough. It might be a little bit too low poly for me, all right? Again, if you look up at the top here, 7,000 faces, 7,300 vertices, and probably I need about double this to make it smooth inside of Blender. So again, let's just kill this, make a new one. And let's go back to 3D code. So this is one way of doing it. Yes, I'm going to undo that change. But I want definitely a more higher version of this. So I'm going to go back to, again, notice I'm in the retopo room. There's different rooms, or if you notice, modes. So all the modes are up here. I'm going to go to Sculpt again. And on the bottom right, I'm going to right-click and go to Auto Topo. And this time I'm going to go to Instant Meshes Auto. Instant Meshes Auto. And what this does is something different. Here you can choose how many, what's your poly count target. And notice I've already chosen 20,000. That's my output poly count, right? So I want 20. So let's say, for example, your artists or your studio said, you can't make an object. I don't want any objects in my game because it's going to be mobile that have more than 20,000 polygons. So you can actually reduce that to exactly the number you want for your budget, your polygon budget, poly count. And then I can just press OK. And then what it'll do is it'll do a little bit of an algorithm for me. And this is one way of doing it, where it creates a bit more, many more polygons than we had before. And this is a little bit better in terms of our resolution. Now, some of it's been lost, if you notice, right? Because look, take a look. Like you still have a little bit of some polygons that are lost in this whole process, okay? And you're going to get that. You're also going to get some n-gons. Notice also that even in here, there's some weird n-gons. And you can go here by hand, as an example where it says points faces, right? Points faces. And what you can do is you can add in your own cuts, if you will. Like if you go to add splits, I increase that. I can actually split my objects as much as I want. I could add additional cuts. I'm just going to undo that change. I can do that. But I can also go to points faces. And I'm just trying to, it's also on mirror snapping. And what this does is it allows you to create your, or generate, if you will, more, oops, undo, more faces and so on with your model than it gives you by automatically kind of calculating your stuff. Now here's something that's happened. I've got these paths. For example, I got these quads, which is the stroke right here, which gives me actually a triangle, and that's okay. But triangles are fairly bad for me to have. And if you notice on the bottom here, it says I have 19,364 quads, 536 triangles, and 258 n-gons. And n-gons are the worst. Triangles are the second worst, if you notice down here. And I could slowly start to creep this in, like, you know, these triangles, I can try and get rid of them by cutting this n-gon here in half. I could do that. I can get rid of this and then cut these to create other geometry. And a good example of that would be add split, where I can kind of, you know, take this one and split this thing in half, right? And then I can choose quads, and I can get rid of this shape right here by deleting it. And when I delete one side, I actually delete the other side as well. And then that kind of creates a quad. That's what this is done here. So if I go to add split, you can move these things around as well to give yourself an idea of all. I'm right-clicking here to do this, to move kind of the new polys around if you really want to, and to give yourself a little bit more detail or less detail in certain areas. Okay, so that's automatic topos, and this is a great start. It's out of scope for us to do manual retopologizing. I mean, in real life, we definitely wouldn't be ever have accepted any kind of triangles. Triangles are a no-no, and n-gons are even worse. N-gons are the worst things you can have. But here we've kind of done a quick and dirty job of getting their model. One thing I want to do now is I'm in the retopo room. I want to create seams for my model so I can have, unwrap his UVs so I can paint on them. So I want to mark seams. If I click mark seams here, one thing I can do is I can auto seam, always bad. Again, this is really, really bad if I did this because it's going to try and find out the most common seams. And so it's creating these islands out of his body, right? And it doesn't make any sense. Like, so look, this seam here, I don't know why it made this, and then it made a bunch of them. Probably better would be for me to mark seams manually, right? So I can, if I wanted to do that, I can just clear the seams, and then I can go there and I can mark seams, and I can mark seams. It'll happen again by zooming in, and I say, like, let's say, for example, I want his top of his body to have one color or one kind of material. I can do that by, I can literally mark the seams here, kind of one by one. And if I click the shift key, I can auto seam anything that's connected to his body. So I can kind of go in there and mark the seam in there. Where it becomes really difficult is underneath his arm. Seaming underneath his arm is kind of difficult. Undo that change. So kind of make it so that his seams are marked underneath his arm, in his armpit there. This guy. I want to show you what this does, because what this does is it creates almost like, I can make it a sleeve or whatever, and then I can paint on that sleeve, because I can create an area where, that's kind of really bad right there. Like I said, I can make an area where now you can see that I have an island that represents his sleeve, his whole sleeve, and an island that represents his other part of his body. A lot of times I want to cut in the middle too, like I want to cut his torso, so maybe I want to give him some pants or whatever eventually. So maybe what I want to do is kind of make it so that, I cut across there. Again, I did that automatically, which kind of messed me up in other places, but that's fine. And the same thing goes with his wrists. I can kind of do that. I can kind of make his hands slightly different, so I can kind of seam those up, undo. It's all because of the way it's been retopoed, right? That's the other thing. It's sometimes the retopo process is not perfect, I would say. Actually, most of the time, auto topo is not a great idea because it just takes away some details, right? So there you go. So we have some seams. I'm marking the seams here of where I think his body should be. I want to have different kind of materials on his maybe on his uniform or whatever. I'm going to just go underneath his chest here and mark this seam. I don't like that. And what this does is when I bring this into Blender, what this does is it creates almost like these islands of where I can paint to do texture painting. Remember we talked about texture painting, right? So now I have these islands, and typically what I want to do is I want to definitely do his head, his neck differently. So kind of do his neck there. And sure, and maybe underneath his tentacles there. So I want to do that seam. Again, I'm really going into this so that you can see what the difference is. Sure. Undo. That was a bad one. Just twisting in there. So no, there we go. So now you see that his head is different than the rest of his body, and it's cut in half because of the way it's been done. So now you see that there's different islands. And if I hover over on the right there, you can see what this would look like. Areas that are really, really red are bad because there's no way of unwrapping. And typically what we want to do is we want to put seams somewhere where you can't see them, like on the inside or the underside of the arm, right? So again, what I want to do is kind of go in there and make another seam that is on the body. And you can use the shift key to do that quickly, but be careful, it might add a seam that you don't want, or the root might be wrong. Right, so there's that seam, right? Why isn't that showing up as two islands? Which is what it should do. Yeah. That's weird. anyways, but you can see how it's unwrapped now, right? So it kind of unwraps it flat. And same thing with the hand. The hand is really messed up because I've got a kind of this mitten. And maybe what I want is I want to come across this same area here to kind of create an area for the thumb that's underneath the. And this is the seams is where it's going to do its cut, right? So when it unwraps, it actually creates an area where, you know, that we can unwrap this object, almost like unwrapping a texture, like, sorry, a material in real life. Like I have a shirt that I want to unwrap, right, or unfold, if you will. And what this is doing is it's creating an area. I'm telling the program how I want this thing to unwrap the UV map, right, for each of the areas on my character. So this is something that I didn't have a chance to do with the earlier class. So if you watched the video earlier class, I'm sorry. But that's what this does now is, if you notice, it creates this mitten area where I can kind of, you know, it's pretty fairly flat. I don't see a lot of red areas. Red areas on the UV map are bad typically, which means they're distorted. There's a lot of distortion. Like here, this area here there's a lot of distortion because of the swath of area. So if I can cut this down actually by going in here and just kind of cutting this area down, which isn't so bad anymore. And this area here is still not the greatest. Okay, so I've got some basic UVs. Again, I probably want to do the cuts over here as well, like in his legs. Like I want to give him kind of like underwear equivalent in terms of UV, and definitely underneath his body. I want to create a seam that goes in the middle of his legs here, because otherwise it won't just unwrap properly. It's going to be too weird, and we don't want that kind of extra weirdness. We're going to have enough weirdness as it is. His feet also are kind of weird, so I kind of want to create a separate area for his feet, almost like socks, right? And, you know, kind of stuff to make sure that his feet are separate. That's kind of a weird seam. And I can take away seams too. So if you press the Control key, you can actually remove seams by clicking on them. There we go. So I kind of remove those seams here on the bottom. And if I want to remove these seams, I can do that too. So I can kind of make a sock effect. I think probably I will, only because it doesn't make any sense to have these seams here. I'd rather have it somewhere different. Again, I can just remove these seams. It's almost like I'm creating an area where the character is going to, like I said, unfold his body parts. All right, and maybe what I want to do is I want to kind of do a sock that goes from back here and then creates almost like a sole of his foot. So kind of one of those. That's probably better for me. And that's way better because then it does kind of cuts it in half. It kind of creates that sole. For each of the socks, there's this part here. It's going to unwrap. See how it looks? Not bad. There's not a lot of red in their area here. As I go up to this is pretty bad still, right? You can tell because of the way it looks. So it seems this way. It kind of opens up, but then like down in here we have problems. So this is where I would say that probably you want to do like shorts on this guy or something like that. So maybe something that goes around like this. And that's not bad. And then if you look at it, it's better. See how it's less red? And this is bad still. This has to be also seamed, and probably right down the back is probably right thing to do, or somewhere in here. So again, one thing that's missing, if you notice, is there's a middle seam that's missing right down the bottom. And again, probably what I want to do here is really quickly add split from here to here, right in the middle. Because what's going to happen is I need to create these areas. Otherwise, what's going to happen is I'm going to have a problem when it comes to how I want to split. Let me increase the size of that. Some problem with that there. Yeah, that's going to be a real problem because it's right along the seam. Yeah, I'm not going to do it now. It's just no time. I'm even running overtime as it is. Okay, so let's add a split somewhere, maybe down the middle of his front, if I can. Yeah, his front has a middle split. So there we go. So we'll just kind of grab this. And again, I want to mark seams right down his front. So putting shift isn't bad because here it just helps me with the splits. And I've already seamed them up, so it's not so bad. And if it doesn't seem that that's working, it's because there's no middle seam here. That's okay. You can't see it, but it's actually there. And so that's not bad now. See how it opens up like shorts? Not bad. So it opens this. It's showing on the right. It shows you on the right, but it's going to look like a preview. That's pretty cool. This is pretty good. This is not good. It needs a seam here on the body as well. And probably right down the middle might be good if I can do it. Excuse me. All right, that's cool. So again, I got areas that have been split. I can open up my character. Face definitely has a problem because now if I hover over here, it looks like a pile of craziness. And you can see that that is really bad. Like any kind of red area is like distortion. So I could do some auto splitting of this area. Definitely I want to do that. And same thing over here, like maybe even cut it even further where there's less possibility of distortion. And that makes it a little easier for this top part, not bad. And again, maybe what I want is I also want to define a seam around the eye because there's a separate eyeball going to be in there. Maybe right in there. Oh, undo. I meant to do this. I will undo that one and this one. But maybe what I want to do is just zoom in. I'm using the Alt key to do this because sometimes you have to, there's not a really great, just the way the topology is here, there's not really great place to do the cut, and that's okay. Again, I mean, we're doing our best based on the time we have, right? So there we go. So that's kind of an flatter area. This is kind of a flatter area. It's not as bad anymore. It's not as red. You can see there's a hole where the eye would have been. That's pretty cool. This is really bad still. And because of these things, because of the tentacles, again, probably what you want to do is you want to kind of cut the tentacles off, just like we do with fingers. Yeah, maybe something like that looks like this. And so that way you can get some of this reduced, right? Still really bad, as you can see, and we can continue to work here all night long if you want to. And I say night because that's how long it'll take to do everything. But I mean, it's not an extremely long process, but it can become pretty crazy if you let it. All right, so that's not terribly good. It's not really that bad. I'm going to leave it like this. All right, now that I've got everything seamed, I can go unwrap. I can go to unwrap. And what this will do is it'll use the seams that I gave it to unwrap the islands like we normally would see in Blender. And now that we have them unwrapped, I can paint them up in the paint room. I can go back to the paint room, and I can literally go through here, and I can add a layer. Let's add another layer here. So here's my layer. And I can choose the different kinds of paint that I want to use. So I can go, I want to do, let's say, some kind of leather looking material around his chest. I can choose a different kind of brush. So here I am and things. So I'm going to choose this brush. And as it's too big. That's why the problem is. The brush is massive. There we go. The brush is like huge. So I can go in here and, you know, kind of paint this up with leather. I can make it so it's shiny if I want. Let's say the top part of his body is in here. He's going to be kind of like wearing some kind of leather outfit, but only this part. And it's going to be shiny like this. This is kind of the material that I've chosen. So kind of up to here. And then what I can do is I can choose other materials instead of leather. Let's just choose. Yes. Sure, I love when this happens. It's like the layer is locked. Yeah, I know. So yeah, and one thing to do is maybe I want to save now. Like not saving is a terrible thing, guys. It's like imagine if I just stopped right now and I didn't get this part, that would be really bad. But yeah, I mean, I can definitely choose to start drawing with different kinds of materials on top of his body. So kind of one of these, where he's got like this body that looks like this. Take a look at that now. What do you think? Almost like this scaliness around his entire body for his skin. And anywhere where he's not painted means that the model hasn't been, the texture hasn't been applied. This is almost like a procedural thing that I've applied to him. And the reason why I use the metallic is so that I can quickly identify areas that, again, haven't been modified. So to make him look like he's a real scary looking alien. All right, and anywhere else hasn't been modified. If I don't paint it, it'll be black, which will be really bad. So you gotta be careful. You get it underneath all the areas. And again, I'm using symmetry for this. So if I do one side, I should be able to capture the other side underneath his feet too. And anywhere else I can see that he's got that area there. I have a base layer that I've done. All right, pretty good. And now that I've got this, he's got this model look to him, I can go into, so this is the paint room with his layers and stuff. I can choose different, you know, I can make my own materials and so on. I'm not going to, I'm running out of time here. I have 10 minutes to bring him into Unity and, or sorry, into Blender and see what it looks like, and into Mixamo, and then into Sketchfab. So I've got to stop. So under Bake, one thing I can do is I can bake my paint mesh to my sculpt mesh, right? Which is kind of interesting. I can do that. And it tells me how I want to bake it. So I bake it in. Takes a little bit of time to do. And now it's baked in. So I've got my mesh in there in my paint room. And if I go back to my retopo room, which is this, you can see now that this is my model. I can actually go to File, Export Retopo Object, and I can retopo him out to the FBX that I had before, the Chthon. Save it. Yes. Ha, see? This is where I have a problem, where it says it's going to exit. Save your work. Yeah, sure, maybe not. And I love this. This can happen all the time. This is where I'm like, make sure you save your work, right? Because otherwise, 3D Coat, Blender, all those programs, even Maya, it doesn't matter. They crash, right? So it doesn't matter professional or not. It just, there's only so much your machine can take. You know, so that's why it kind of looks like this. I didn't preserve everything. That's fine. I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm going to go back to, like I said, I've run out of time. So I'm going to go to the retopo room. And I'm just going to file, export retopo object to my FBX. And hopefully that'll just work without crashing like the way it just did. That's always bad. Let's try that one more time, and then we're going to be done. And I'll just accept what I have, and I'll put it up on thing, only because I'm running out of time, not because I don't want to do it. So file, maybe we'll do is we will go into the retopo room again and file, export retopo object into something called Cathon 2, so it doesn't write over the other one. So Cathon 2, and it doesn't like any of that. It just doesn't want to retopo or save my object. Did it even do it? It did. It looks like it did do it. I'm not sure if it just crashed after it exported. Let's just import the object from FBX, and let's see what I get if I bring in Cathon. Oh, it's 0 bytes. You can see it. So that's not good. Let's go back. And sometimes, you need to restart your whole system, that kind of thing. I also like to check my memory, so Control-Shift-Escape for this kind of thing. Sometimes you have other stuff that's going on. You can see the CPU and GPU usage for different parts, but that is really strange that it would do that. Let's try and bring in an autosave of my model. Is this before I retopoed? Nope. This looks like it's pretty good, actually. Let's see if I can do this one. So File, Export Retopo Object, then FBX. And we'll just use... Hopefully it won't crash again. If it does, it does. That looked like it worked. That's why it's good to save and resave. And File, Import from FBX. And I want to grab this one here. Yes, and I'm going to zoom in there to see what it looks like, just to pre-inspect to see how it looks good or bad. I think it looks pretty good. And the way to know this is, again, if you go into edit mode, you can see that it's not bad in terms of poly count. Let's bring it into Mixamo. So again, I'm going to go into Mixamo here. So here's Mixamo. That's my last one. I'm going to bring in my new one. I kind of made it similar to the earlier one, but I'll bring in the new one that I have on my desktop. Again, let's just bring in, he's going to be called Cathon. Now I've retopoed him, and I've also updated his UVs, which also is going to make a difference in terms of the way he looks here. I don't have a texture yet. I was going to bake his texture, but that crashed, and it happens. This is pretty good, right? Looks pretty good. Next, I want to put his chin in place. That's going to be kind of hard to put his chin in place, but I figure his chin is somewhere over here. And his wrists aren't so bad. They're like right there. And elbows, probably somewhere in there. And his knees. And then his groin. And then pressing. Now he's got like mittens for hands, so I'm going to make it so he has no fingers. If I want 2 chain fingers, like it'll be like maybe just for this part and this part. That's not bad either. 2 chain fingers, and click next. And so he has some kind of bone in there ahead of time. When I put him into Unity, I can make it so he can do this. He can open his, and almost like claw, like open and close his hands. That's not bad. And so he's auto retopoing or auto rigging right now, his character. So what this is really great is if you're making a horror game or realistic kind of game, where you want to bring in your character and get them to be auto rigged. For someone who's doing, like, let's say, for example, a more cartoony stylized game like a snowball fight, maybe this isn't the best character, but you can find other ones that are that would work fine here too, right? All right, so let's see how he deforms. So he's deforming pretty good. I'm surprised. Click next. And you can see that he's samba dancing now. That's kind of weird, but let's see if there's any different. So samba dancing, I always make him dance because you can see the deformations. Take a look at his shoulders. This is where I always worry. His shoulders, his body, the bottom part of his body, like that's looking really weird. Something's wrong with his legs. That's probably because of the way I modeled them, though. But it's not terrible, is what I'm saying. It's not. That's pretty bad up here on the neck area. It's hard to see, but on the neck area, it's kind of deformed up here, and that's because of the way that the model deforms. All right. Let's make it so he's not samba dancing anymore. Let's make it, just give him a walk, kind of thing. You know, maybe walk like this. The tough guy. I don't know. Tough guy walk. Let's walk in place so we can see what that looks like. And that's easier for us to spot any deformalities or deformations, if you will. Probably a better word. And looks pretty good. This part of his leg looks like he's got a rip in his leg. I don't know. Probably the way I did that. It's not terrible, and his face doesn't look bad, you know, kind of thing. If I wanted his tentacles to do something, I could put bones in the tentacles too, right? And that kind of thing. Let's take a look at the zombie walk thing. That might be weird too. In place, please. Again, I'm looking for deformations is what I'm doing here. You can see some in the shoulder area. Look at that shoulder. Look at that weird shoulder going on right there. See that? That crease? That's because of all the weird polygons that we had, right? So yeah, some definitely, this is the problems that you get with you when you don't do your model properly, and just the way it is. And let's just try and do one of those in place. He's walking around. That's pretty good. Okay, I want to bring this into Blender now, so or down into Unity. So I want to download this character. Again, I'm going to choose FBX for Unity. 30 frames per second is pretty good. If you want to do more, you can. And I want to definitely go uniform reduction, so it's not none. A none would be every frame, right? So I want to click on download. And I'm going to download this thing as Chthon crouched walking on my desktop. Sure. And when I go back into Blender now, hopefully Blender won't crash, I'll bring him in as that model. So I'll file, import, and I'll bring him in as a FBX. And let's take a look at what he looks like here. He's got his rig now, right, which is kind of cool. He's got his rig. Again, all the regular deformations that happen, there's only this many frames. That's all he's got. You can see also that there's some weird deformations here in the hips. Look at that. That doesn't look right, right? Really weird hip deformation. And that's because the way the model has been made, right? That's us. That's not Blender, and it's definitely not 3D code. That's me. That's a me problem. So that's like, again, if I look here to about, looks to go about 30 frames. I can go to about that many frames, 30. Or let's say maybe something more like, I don't know, 40 frames. And so you can see that here's the model. This is the actual shape, maybe 35. Yeah. And then if I run it, you can test it out. As he walks, right? And that's pretty good. Now I want to bring this into Sketchfab. I want to bring this into Sketchfab, and I believe it's built into Blender. Maybe not. Let me see. So I want to go into User Preferences, and if I wanted to go into Add-ons, I type in Sketch, into Sketchfab. If you click on Import Sketchfab, and then click in Save User Settings, then what I get is a file IO output where I can call this guy Chthon, right? Chthon. And I need an API key. I can get this from Sketchfab. So if I go back out to Sketchfab, so here's my Sketchfab, and I want to just drop out of this, and I want to go here. Want to get my, if I go to settings, as an example, I can get my API, whatever this is. It won't work for you anyway, even if you try it. But then I go into my API key and paste it in. And then claim my token and upload. And what this is doing is directly uploading it right to Sketchfab, and I can then view my model online directly as it's being processed. So this will be like anyone can see this model as I've made it. So if you want to do this and put this link to your Sketchfab model inside your discussion board for your participation marks. You can certainly do that. You can also, I'll let you do a screen cap, of what you've worked on in 3D Coat if somehow it crashed, because it can happen, or Blender. But I want to see what your crazy creation is in your organic model as you this week. So we've done 2 weeks of this. Last week we did kind of a little bit of intro to rigging and animation and so on. And this week we're doing, the rest of organic modeling. We have a really weird Chthon that we've made in 3D Coat. Right, so that's pretty cool. You can look at that right in Sketchfab as how it looks. Okay, that's right online for you. All right, that's it for me this week. We'll resume on Thursday. Thursday, I'm going to do a bit of a check on your project. Okay.